I never expected that a knock on my door from the older man who lived across the hall would end in me kissing him breathless on his living room floor. We'd always been polite, exchanging nods in the elevator or brief conversations in the lobby, but he was married, quiet, and looked more like someone who should be watching documentaries than starring in one with me. That day, though, when he asked if I could help with his new TV, I saw something different in his eyes. Maybe it had been there all along, hidden under the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise. His name was Daniel. 55, calm voice, deep laugh, a well-trimmed beard that always smelled faintly of cedar when I stood close enough to catch it. He worked from home, said he used to teach literature before going into freelance editing, and whenever we spoke, he carried that same warm rhythm, like he chose every word carefully, deliberately. I was 28, living alone, working long hours as a digital designer, and too used to my own company. Still, every time I saw him, something stirred in me that I tried to ignore. Daniel's wife traveled often. I'd seen her once or twice. Blonde, professional, always on her phone. They didn't seem unhappy, just distant, like two people who shared a roof but not a life. I didn't pry. I didn't need to. The afternoon he knocked, I was halfway through reheating leftovers when I heard it. He stood there with an apologetic smile, holding a box almost half his size, the sleek packaging of a high-end smart TV peeking out from behind his arm. "Hey," he said, smiling a little sheepishly. "Sorry to bother, but my wife's out of town, and I'm not great with this kind of thing. Any chance you could help me set this up?" Of course I said yes. How could I not? His apartment was neat but lived in. Shelves full of books, a record player in the corner, a soft brown couch that looked like it had hosted many quiet nights. The new TV box sat against the wall, unopened, wires and manuals scattered nearby. "I figured I'd get it installed before she gets back tomorrow," he explained, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's been wanting it for months, and I got impatient." We unboxed it together, our arms brushing more than once, each time sending a small jolt through me. I kept my focus on the screen, the instructions, anything but the way he smelled or the lines at the corners of his eyes when he smiled. "You good with tech?" he asked, watching me as I screwed in the stand. "Pretty decent," I replied. "I've set up a few for friends. This one's a little nicer than mine, though." "You're saving me," he said, voice low, eyes lingering on mine for a second too long. That's when I first felt it. The shift. The room got quieter, somehow warmer, like the space between us was shrinking without us even moving. I handed him the remote, and our fingers touched. Just for a second, but long enough to make both of us pause. We finished setting it up, but the air never returned to normal. It stayed thick, electric, like something unspoken had begun to take shape. When I sat on the floor to organize the cables, he lowered himself beside me, our knees touching. Neither of us moved. "You've got a gentle way with things," he said, his voice quieter now. I looked at him and he looked back, and in that moment, there was no pretending. Just two men sitting too close, breathing the same slow, heated breath. We sat on the floor, knees still touching, the silence between us holding more weight than any sentence could carry. The television screen blinked to life above us, casting a soft glow over the room, but neither of us looked at it. Instead, I found myself staring at Daniel's hands, broad, steady, with a little silver at the knuckles and veins that rose just enough to catch my eye. He held the remote like it was a shield, his thumb absently grazing the volume button, but I could tell his focus wasn't on the screen. It was on the space between us, the slight pressure where our legs met, and the way we hadn't moved since the moment our fingers brushed. "So," he said, his voice breaking the stillness, "what do I owe you for the help?" "You don't owe me anything," I said softly, meeting his gaze. "Happy to help." His lips parted slightly, like he wanted to say more, but didn't. Instead, he nodded and looked away, the light from the TV flickering against the thoughtful set of his jaw. I wanted to touch him. I wanted to lean in and close the space that had only gotten smaller by the second. But I also knew this wasn't a game. This was a man with a marriage, with history, with things I didn't fully understand. Still, something in his body betrayed his calm. His hand shifted, just slightly, resting on the floor behind me. Closer than it needed to be. His pinky brushed against mine again, and this time it didn't move away. "I haven't had company in a long time," he said suddenly. "Not like this." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. He turned to face me again, his eyes darker now, serious. "I mean someone who makes me feel like I'm not invisible." I swallowed hard, the ache in my chest blooming fast. "You're not invisible." He nodded slowly. "I know. At least, not to you." And that was it, that was the shift. The moment where everything balanced on the edge of a breath and one move could tip it all over. I could have pulled away. I could have made a joke. But instead, I turned to him, leaned in ever so slightly, and whispered, "I haven't stopped thinking about you since you knocked on my door." His eyes widened a fraction. And then, without another word, he leaned forward and kissed me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't unsure. It was full of hesitation, of hunger, of unspoken thoughts that had been building behind small smiles and polite conversations in the hallway. His lips were warm, careful, but firm against mine. His hand slid up, fingers curling behind my neck, pulling me closer, deepening the kiss until we were no longer two men helping each other with technology. We were something else entirely. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing harder, our foreheads resting together, eyes shut as we caught up with what we'd just done. "I shouldn't have," he murmured. "But you did," I whispered back. "And I wanted it." He pulled back slightly, studying my face, searching for regret. I gave him none. Only honesty. "Maybe we shouldn't go further," he said, voice shaking. "But God, I don't want to stop." "You don't have to," I said. "Not unless it's out of guilt." He didn't respond right away. He just reached up, brushed his thumb along my jaw, and kissed me again, this time harder, deeper, filled with the kind of tension that no amount of years or rings or rules could keep buried. We didn't get up off the floor. We just shifted closer, hands beginning to roam, cautious at first, then bolder, touching, caressing, learning each other through fingertips and breath. His hands trembled slightly as they slid beneath my shirt, resting over my stomach like he needed to ground himself in skin. "I don't know what this means," he whispered between kisses. "It means you're alive," I said, pressing my forehead to his. "And you want to feel something real." We stayed like that until the heat between us couldn't be ignored, bodies pressed chest to chest, breath tangled, lips searching skin with increasing urgency. It was too much to pretend anymore. Too much to hold back. "Come to the bedroom," he said, voice thick and low. And I followed. The hallway to Daniel's bedroom was short, dimly lit, and strangely quiet, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. He walked ahead of me without speaking, his back straight but his hands slightly clenched at his sides, like he was trying to hold himself together when he was already coming undone. I followed closely, my heart beating loud in my ears, not just from desire, but from the weight of what this moment meant, for him, for me, for both of us. The bedroom was warm. Lived in. No pretense. A simple bed with navy sheets, books piled on a nightstand, and a window cracked open to let in the night air. He turned to face me once we were inside, and for a second neither of us moved. We just stood there in the low light, caught between uncertainty and the magnetic pull that had been drawing us together since the moment our hands touched on his living room floor. "I haven't done this in a very long time," Daniel said softly, voice nearly breaking. "Not with a man." "You don't have to explain," I whispered, stepping closer. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," he replied, and his voice steadied a little. "But I want to say it anyway. Because this isn't just a thing I'm doing behind someone's back. It's something I've been needing for years." I stood in front of him, close enough to feel the warmth of his chest, the tremble in his breath. I reached out slowly, placed my hand on his shoulder, then let it drift down to his chest where I could feel his heart pounding under my palm. "We don't have to rush," I said. "We can just be." He looked into my eyes for a long moment, then leaned in and kissed me again. This kiss was different. Not the hesitant meeting of lips from before, not the impulsive spark that led us here, but something heavier. Fuller. It was the kiss of someone who had held back for too long and finally decided to stop pretending. His hands found my waist, strong and careful, pulling me in until our bodies touched from knees to chest. I slid my arms around his back, fingertips exploring the broad curve of his shoulders. He felt solid, steady, and warm, like safety wrapped in skin. He kissed me again and again, his mouth moving with growing need, his hands beginning to explore with more certainty now. I helped him out of his shirt, his breath catching as I ran my hands across his chest, tracing the salt and pepper hair there, pressing my lips gently to his skin. He closed his eyes, tilting his head back, a soft groan escaping his throat as my mouth traveled along his collarbone, down the center of his chest. When he pulled my shirt off, his hands trembled just a little, but he didn't stop. He looked at me like he was memorizing every inch of what he saw and then leaned in to kiss me again, deeper, slower, his hands now roaming freely, sliding along my sides, my back, my hips. "Lie down," he whispered, his voice low and hoarse. I did. The bed was soft, the sheets cool beneath my skin, but none of it compared to the heat of his body as he settled beside me. We touched slowly, like we were telling each other stories through fingertips and skin. His mouth explored my neck, my jaw, my shoulders, kissing me like he'd waited a lifetime for this. Clothes disappeared between kisses. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. Every touch said what our mouths couldn't. I want this. I want you. I want to feel again. When we finally made love, it was quiet. Deep. Unapologetic. His hands were everywhere, holding, tracing, worshiping me like he was trying to burn every sensation into memory. I gave him everything I had, every sound, every sigh, every inch of skin, and he took it all with a kind of reverence that broke something open in me I hadn't even realized was still guarded. Afterward, we lay tangled in each other, slick with sweat, hearts still racing, our chests rising and falling in sync. He held me like he didn't want to let go, like he didn't quite believe this had really happened. "I didn't expect this," he whispered. "Me neither," I said, running my fingers gently along his arm. "But I'm glad we didn't stop it." He kissed the top of my head and sighed. "Me too." The air in Daniel's bedroom was still warm, even though the night outside had cooled. The curtains had shifted slightly in the breeze, letting in the soft hum of the city and the occasional sound of tires on wet pavement. His breathing was slow, now steadier, brushing gently against my chest as he lay with his head just beneath my collarbone. My arm was around him, fingers tracing absent-minded shapes on his bare shoulder. I hadn't meant to fall asleep, but being wrapped around him like that, quiet, close, full of something deeper than just sex, had made my body melt into stillness. He stirred just a little and tilted his head up to look at me. His face in the faint light looked softer now, the lines at the edges of his eyes less like marks of age and more like quiet memories. I ran my thumb along his jaw, and he smiled, tired but warm. "Hey," he whispered. "Hey," I whispered back, brushing a bit of damp hair off his forehead. "I didn't think I'd sleep at all," he said, his voice low and calm. "But you knocked something loose in me." I chuckled gently and leaned in to kiss his forehead. "That a good thing?" He nodded, then shifted so we were facing each other more directly, the sheets sliding down between us. Our bodies were still warm and close, bare skin touching from thigh to chest. He reached over and placed his hand against my cheek, holding it there like he didn't want to let go. "I feel light," he said slowly. "Like I've been carrying a secret for years and finally put it down." "You don't have to carry it anymore," I said. "Not with me." He closed his eyes for a moment, his thumb brushing the edge of my lip. "You're kind. And patient. I didn't expect someone like you to just walk into my apartment. I didn't expect you to answer your door looking that good with a TV in your arms." He laughed, soft, rich, real. The kind of laugh that comes from a place just behind the ribs. The silence afterward wasn't heavy. It was full of breath and touch and that sense of being seen without trying too hard. I let my hand wander slowly along his side, feeling the shape of him, the warmth still rising from his skin. He didn't move away. He moved closer. "Do you think I'm crazy for doing this?" he asked suddenly, his voice almost lost in the sheets between us. I shook my head. "No. I think you needed it." We both did. His hand slid behind my neck and he kissed me again. It was slower now, gentler, but deeper in another way. We weren't hungry anymore, we were open. Tender. His mouth lingered over mine like he was tasting something he hadn't allowed himself to want. I kissed him back with the same softness, letting our lips speak everything else we didn't have words for. We didn't make love again, not that night. We didn't need to. Instead, we touched like we were still learning the map of each other's bodies, hands trailing, skin warming, every sigh shared between us. At one point, he pulled me against his chest, my head resting near his collarbone, and just held me like that for what felt like hours. No rush. No pressure. Just being. The window stayed open and I could hear a dog barking somewhere in the distance, the sound oddly comforting. His fingers kept running through my hair, over my neck, down the curve of my back, until I felt myself drift again, half asleep, but safe. Wanted. Known. When I woke again, it was early morning. The room was still dim, the sky just beginning to lighten, and Daniel hadn't moved. His arm was still around me, his leg draped over mine, his chest rising and falling in that same slow rhythm. And in that quiet hour before the world returned, I knew something had changed. We weren't just two neighbors anymore. We were two men who had seen each other, touched each other, and opened a door that couldn't be closed again. I woke to the smell of coffee. The bedroom was empty now, but warm, with the sheets still holding the imprint of his body and the scent of his skin. For a few moments, I just lay there, my hands spread out across the space he had filled, listening to the quiet rustle of movement from the other room. It was the kind of stillness that didn't feel awkward or tense, it felt natural. Like he hadn't left, but just stepped away to do something simple, something shared. I sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around my waist as I padded to the door. I found him standing barefoot in the kitchen, shirtless, wearing soft plaid pajama pants, and holding 2 mugs in his hands. His back was to me, and the early morning sunlight poured in through the window, making his shoulders glow with a softness that caught me off guard. His muscles moved beneath his skin as he stirred a spoon in one of the cups. He turned when he heard me. His eyes lit up instantly, as if seeing me in the doorway somehow confirmed that last night wasn't just a memory. "Good morning," he said, smiling in that quiet, low way that made something in me twist. "Morning," I replied, stepping closer. "You made coffee?" I figured it was the least I could do after what we shared. He offered me a mug, and I took it, letting our fingers brush for just a second too long. The heat from the porcelain was nothing compared to the warmth of his touch. We sat on the small couch in his living room, the one I'd helped set the TV up in front of just hours ago. The remote sat on the armrest. The new screen reflected our silhouettes side by side, and for a strange, fragile moment, everything felt absurdly normal. Daniel sipped his coffee, then looked over at me, resting his elbow on the cushion and turning his body fully to face mine. "I need to say something," he began, his voice careful, like he'd rehearsed this in his head already. "Last night meant something to me. It wasn't just about sex. I didn't expect it and I wasn't planning it, but I don't want to pretend it didn't happen either." I nodded slowly, placing my mug down on the table. "I don't want to pretend either," I said. "It meant something to me too." He let out a slow breath, as if the weight of that admission settled into his chest and somehow made everything feel heavier, but not in a bad way. "Just real. My wife comes home tomorrow," he said, eyes holding mine. "And I don't know what that means yet. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all the feelings I've been ignoring for years." "You don't have to figure it all out today," I said gently. "But I'm not going to lie and say I don't want more." He looked down, then reached for my hand, lacing our fingers together. "I've wanted more too," he admitted, voice thick. "I've just been too scared to say it out loud." His thumb rubbed slowly across the back of my hand. We didn't kiss then. We didn't need to. The intimacy had already settled between us like a third presence in the room, quiet, undeniable, steady. We spent the rest of the morning talking. He told me about the first boy he'd kissed in college and how scared he'd been afterward. How he buried it, chose what was expected, convinced himself it was enough. I told him how I'd always known, but had learned early on not to expect older men to ever choose someone like me out loud. "You're not a secret," I said. "Not to me." He didn't respond right away. He just leaned forward, placed his forehead against mine, and held it there, both of us breathing the same breath, sharing the same slow ache that comes from wanting what feels just out of reach. When I finally got up to leave, he walked me to the door. His fingers lingered on mine even as he opened it, like they didn't want to let go. "I don't know what's going to happen next," he said. "Then let's just take it one morning at a time," I replied. He smiled, and that smile stayed with me all the way across the hall. The hours passed slower after I got back to my apartment, like time had suddenly started paying attention. Everything looked the same, my keys on the table, the open laptop on the couch, a half-full water glass beside my bed, but none of it felt the same anymore. My body still ached in that tender, satisfied way, but it wasn't just physical. It was emotional too. Like something had been shaken loose, something I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. Across the hall, Daniel's door stayed closed. I didn't hear from him that day. Not a knock, not a text, not even the soft shuffle of his footsteps in the hallway. And though I told myself to be patient, to give him space, I couldn't stop my ears from tuning in every time I heard the elevator chime or a neighbor's door slam shut. That quiet hope, that flutter that maybe it was him coming to say he didn't want this to be over. But it didn't come. And when night fell and the hallway lights clicked on and his door still hadn't opened, I sat in the dark of my apartment and stared at the TV we'd set up just days earlier, his, not mine. I remembered how his fingers had grazed mine behind the screen, how he'd looked at me like I was something more than just a neighbor with a toolset and a free afternoon. The next morning, I passed him in the hallway. He was dressed for work, a button-down shirt tucked into clean jeans, his hair still damp from the shower. For a second, I didn't think he'd say anything. I prepared myself for the nod, the polite smile, the look away. But he stopped. "Hey," he said. I turned. "Hey." He looked tired, like the weight of something heavy had finally landed on him. But there was something else in his eyes too, something steady, not regretful. A kind of decision. "She got back last night," he said. I nodded, unsure of what to say. "We talked," he continued. "I didn't lie. I told her I'd been unhappy. That I'd met someone. I didn't say everything, but I said enough." My breath caught. "What did she say?" "She said she's known," he said quietly. "Maybe not the details, but she's felt it. The distance. The walls. We agreed to take space. Real space. She's going to stay with her sister for a while." I didn't know what I expected to feel in that moment. Maybe guilt, maybe relief, maybe confusion. But all I felt was stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when a door stops being just wood and hinges and starts being a choice. He took a step closer, his voice softer now. "I don't know where this goes. I don't know how to do this. But I can't pretend anymore. And I don't want to hide from myself for the rest of my life." I met his eyes and held them. "You don't have to know everything," I said. "Just don't shut me out." He nodded, his expression cracking just enough to show the fear beneath it and the hope. Then he did something he hadn't done in public before. He reached out and took my hand. Right there in the hallway. His thumb pressed into my palm and he let out a slow breath. "You're not just a moment," he said. "You're a beginning." I didn't answer with words. I just squeezed his hand back. And that was enough. Later that week, I helped him mount the TV again, this time properly, on the wall. He stood behind me, arms around my waist, guiding my hands, laughing when I dropped a screw, and swore under my breath. We kissed again afterward. Not urgently. Not because we had to. But because we could. Because now he wanted to. Because the door hadn't just opened. He'd stepped through it.